Developing your own style is probably one of the hardest and stressful things to do when we're painting. It is more of a long-term thing, and that's where we need to be patient. And I love the term or the approach. My paintings are a conglomeration of every good artist and every good painting that I've ever seen. That allows us all to kind of get a broad influence, because I think if we get too much of a direct influence by one artist, or say two artists that paint sort of similar, our work will mimic theirs a little too much. And I think that's the number one fear I think most artists should have in the back of your mind as a overriding sort of thing. Because I think with painting, one of the most exciting things to do is to be able to think you can pick up a brush and you can create something that the world's never seen before. We have that potential in us. So with that, I thought I would just show some of the artists that really had a major influence on me, so you'll be able to sort of then backtrack through, if you're looking at my work on Instagram or somewhere, or through the YouTube channel, you think, oh, that one looks a little Streeton influenced. And when you think even the Beatles were influenced by other artists, the rock and roll artists that came before them, Beethoven, all the great artists. Roy Orbison was influenced by Patsy Cline, Lefty Frizzell, Don Gibson, but it all can and should and will come around to being our own way of delivering our music or our painting. So this one's an Arthur Streeton. I've mentioned him quite a bit over the years, and he was probably one of the first artists that, after painting with my father, who is this painting here, this was more of a recent one. So I think my dad's 92 this year, and he painted this one when he was about 90. So still painting quite well, but that kind of gives you an idea of the style and the approach that I was first accustomed to. And if you were to look at any of my earlier paintings, you would say, oh, they're a poor imitation of my father. And that's one of the dangers. I feel we shouldn't get too close or allow ourselves to be too influenced by family, friends, artists that we know closely, because we can become a little too latched on to that artist and a little too highly influenced by that artist. So Streeton, I think the one thing that I did love from his work was his use of blue, and that is how he created such great depth. But he also worked with great contrast as well. And I have to say, I always loved his way of painting foliage. It probably wasn't the best way or an exact way, but he did have an interesting brush mark and feel. So after painting for about 12 months, a good family friend, Terry Gawthorne, said, you know what, the worst thing you can do, as I said, paint like your dad. You'll only ever be compared, oh yes, Collie's doing okay, to now he's doing very well. Just poor imitations, or he paints just like his dad. So, and I think there is nothing better than trying to have our own approach. This one's Harold Herbert. So Terry took me into the State Gallery of Queensland. We went to the Realists, the Abstract and the Impressionists. That's how they just had it laid out. And it was really seeing Streeton's work and the Impressionist style that really did excite me visually. I can remember seeing the first Streeton, almost feeling the tingles and hair stand up on the back of my neck as a sort of about a 22-year-old. So that's Streeton, and I think his work did have just a lot of visually exciting elements to it with the light. But so Harold Herbert, probably one of the lesser known watercolourists, but I think what I learnt from his work was just the economy, the importance of placement of shape, and how to sort of visually portray the narrative that you're trying to show to the world. He was just a master at simplification. But I think his work from 1928 to about 1940, maybe 42-ish, was his best period. He tended to get a little too tight early on, and then he got a little too loose in those final few years. I think when his health was suffering, because he did pass away at 52 of cirrhosis of the liver. But he left a really wonderful mark on Australian art, and especially Australian watercolour. So you may be able to see some of that Herbert's influence into the current and past watercolourists of Australia as well, but just a brilliant painter as well. So then we have Trevor Chamberlain. There's been so many brilliant British artists, David Curtis, Fred Cooming, let me think, all ones that are my favourites. And there are plenty more, but John Alfred Arnsby Brown was a marvellous one, Sago, and so there are plenty. But for some reason, I think I did really gravitate to Trevor's work. Was just, once again, not only was he great at simplifying and telling that story, but I think it was how his marks, when he needed them to count, say it might be a shadow up against a light which is coming in, say in this area here or that edge there. I think those little accents that he got in his work were really sort of quite revolutionary for me. And I think so I've always been a big fan of his work, and was fortunate that in 2023 I did get the chance to meet Trevor in his home and had a look at some of the work that he had there. Not that he had much, but it was lovely to actually be able to pay tribute to him for his lessons and his work's influence on my life. And that's where we'll have musical influence as well on our life, or movies and directors. But I've probably fairly highly sort of mentioned Richard's work, but he was one of the other artists that my father did introduce me to. He had his book, Schmid Paints the Landscape, and then I was able to find Schmid Paints the Figure a few years later, and managed to get my own copy years later. But so those four artists with my father were probably the fundamentals. My father did teach me sort of the structural, compositional, design, colour, tone. He didn't actually have a lot of thought on edges and all that, but he did get great edges, and I think some people just have that naturally, so that might be one of the things that he didn't actually have to think about. But he did set me up structurally with information, education, that really has kept me going still today, sort of 30 going on 39 years of painting later. So that has been a huge benefit and influence on my life, but I did wish to drift away from that. And that can be the tricky part. You may find a really great teacher that offers lessons locally that you're able to go to once a week or twice a week. And then, so how do we start to drift away from your main source of influence and inspiration? And that's where I would suggest is to start to develop your art education. We don't really need to know the year someone was born. That's always an extra, where they were born and all this sort of stuff. But the text behind the person's life, but definitely looking at the broad scope of great artists, because there's, of course, Sorolla and Zorn and Ramon Casas and Mancini. And in Australia, if you want to see a lot of the great Australian painters, I have a Pinterest page, Master Australian Artists, and they're all deceased artists. So they're all ones that you don't want to actually probably be on this list ever, but it's an inevitability. But that could be a good source if you wish to think, oh, geez, you know what, I don't know much about Australian art, or I am an Australian artist and I would like to learn more. I'm hoping, I think I've got about 550 images there, as high resolution as possible. Anyhow, let's have a look at John Alfred Arnsby Brown. He was a British painter, 1860s, and I almost sort of think he was almost a cow painter. Most of the paintings that I've ever seen are of cows, and he did them so beautifully. But it was also his use of light, and I think that one aspect is one of the things that did pass on to other artists, because Australian painters, I think probably even the Californian painting group and Impressionists, some of the Spanish, Italian painters, because of our abundance of sunlight and regular days and bright, strong sunlight, I think we probably naturally sort of think, oh geez, painting sunlight, strong sunlight is almost a birthright to a degree. But Arnsby Brown had that in spades, I feel. The clouds, the slight little dappled light, or sometimes that filtered light. And I think Sago did manage to finesse and maybe fine-tune that a little bit as well, or a little bit further. The great skies, where I do love this painting. It's straight to the point. He's really selling that image. Of course, he was a marvellous colourist and technician as well. And to pass on the baton to Ian Houston, who I think has now since passed as well. I first saw Ian's work in 1990, came sort of out of the blue, had never heard of him before, but I thought, boy, there's a Sago-esque quality to his work. And upon reading his life story, he did befriend Sago and do many a painting trip with him, and gained a lot of influence. So to a degree, there is definite similarities to a degree, but I think with time and subject matter, there is a way to drift away from the master and on to the students who've come after them. And that's where I do sort of hold the information that my father gave me in such high esteem, because that's well and truly stood the test of time. But the other way that we can look at gaining a different or our own style is by travelling to different areas. It may be just to a different state. You may be, say, from Georgia. Hey, why not head over to Colorado for a painting trip? There's a definite different light from Northern Australia to Southern Australia. It is quite different, especially in summer. There's from a green belt to a very arid, dry in summer. So try something very different. I've found going to China, Japan recently, but trips to Italy and France and South Africa, Ireland, and the 15 trips I have done to America, sort of going to, I think, about 24 different states. And there is not a distinct feel from, say, Arizona to California, but there's enough. So you don't have to go internationally, but you will get the really big changes. And the one thing I have learnt by painting some of the buildings in China was just how to visually portray them. And that's another way that we've not only learnt, but we've extended our style. Say your main artist that you love was, say, Northern European. Well, then you definitely go to Egypt and Morocco, some of those really distinctly different parts. If you love Zorn, or that's probably not the greatest example, say great landscaper, say like Arnsby Brown, yeah, go paint in Morocco and some of those deserty, arid areas, so that it does force you to really sort of develop your own approach. Because I think the great concern is that your work is just a faint echo of the person that you've mainly studied with. So to try and put it all in a nutshell, influence almost equals education, I believe. That's where when you get a little stuck, bring up the internet or your favourite books and the bigger variety as well as possible. So that's where I do feel my work is a conglomeration of all those paintings and great artists that I have seen. And that's what makes my work as it is these days. And hopefully it's individual enough to stand out of the crowd as if it is my paintings. So I hope you enjoyed that. All the best. Bye for now.